Здравствуйте, my name is Andrei, and welcome to the third and final part of the Paradox Games mega campaign of Andrei. Now, this part is Hoi4, and unfortunately it was the most difficult for me to get to work properly. The converter worked fine, but I had an issue with the first time I attempted it. The game would irrecoverably crash. So I had to reinstall the mod and restart my game, which was at 1940 at that point. Which is why this video is late, because I was already 4 years into a game. But I digress. I think the new game that I started ended up going better anyway. And I guess it has consistently taken me 8 days to make each of these, so it's sort of consistent. So anyway, if you haven't seen the other two parts, I'll link them in the description. I'd recommend you watch them first, but you can stick with this one if you want, because I think this one was very good. So the first thing I had to do was I decided to fix some of the states that transferred over from Victoria 2, because a lot of them looked really strange. And some of them were just heinous to look at, like Spain owned a bunch of random land in Italy and France and stuff. And I really didn't want them to just kind of keep that, because it looked terrible and there's no way the borders were going to look even okay. And that really bothered me. Now, I was expecting it to be kind of difficult to get things to happen, so I did artificially start 2 or 3 wars. But after that, most of the game, it just kind of took off on its own. Like one of the first wars that happened, this is one that I did artificially start, is that Manchuria got invaded by Japan. Now, I decided, because I was going ahead and setting up division template that I usually use, which requires me to edit the base one because none of them are ever like it, I decided to send volunteers to China to see if I could fight off the Japanese, and as it went, with my volunteers and the Chinese basically exclusively using the weapons I sent them, because I tagged over to check, I just wanted to see whose weapons they were using. I found out that we were winning, and we actually beat the crap out of the Japanese. Because unlike in our timeline, the Japanese never really heavily industrialized, so they were really far behind this whole game. Aside from that, I went to war with the Yarkand, I think it was, and Mongolia, which were just the 2 little countries that I probably could have taken over in EU or Vic 2, but I just didn't, so I went ahead and grabbed them real quick. Generated a little bit of world tension, wasn't any big deal. And then the next thing that happened, and this was the first organic war that I had no part in starting, was a war between Romania and Serbia. Now, I'd been trying to keep Serbia alive throughout this entire mega campaign, and it's had varying degrees of success. Because when they started off, they were about as big as Yugoslavia was. Or they were capable of being as big as Yugoslavia was at some point, but anyway. I went on the side of the Serbs, and we were probably going to lose that war because I could only send like 3 volunteers and they were outnumbered by like a factor of 4 times. So I just invaded Romania and took on the land. Kind of slimy, kind of scumbaggy, but it only took me like 60 days to justify, so I think it was profitable, and it kept Serbia alive. Then the next thing that happened, this spiraled out of control into a war that would last the rest of the game. I don't remember what year this was. I think it was like 1938 or something. Which meant that this war actually ended up lasting 7 years. So I declared war on Denmark. And I figured, okay, it's just Denmark. They don't even own Denmark. They own like Jutland, but they don't even own Copenhagen. What are they going to be? They were actually very easy to beat. I extremely outnumbered them and had a lot of tanks. Actually, I've used a tactic where all my divisions had at least light tanks in them. Usually works pretty well. We went down the deep battle doctrine of mass assault, and I wiped the floor with the Danes. It took a little bit, and it started to slow down towards the end as I realized that the British were there. And I was kind of frustrated with being at war with the British, because I figured they're just going to be really annoying. It's always really hard to invade them. And thus became the first time that the British would intervene in one of these wars. I did take out the Danes. That part wasn't too hard, and I wasn't really at war with anybody else for a bit. But I decided that rather than attempting to send my troops navally over to France, which I knew, given the British, despite the fact this is a different universe, still ruling the waves, would be a bad idea, I decided to just go through Germany. Like Germany did to Belgium with their Schlieffen plan to get to France, I went through Germany to get to France. In a different context, that is, where the target itself was kind of Germany. So I fought like a 2-year-long war with Germany, and this was really the culmination of a lot of stuff in this mega campaign. I'd gone to war with Germany so many times, at least in Vic 2. Kind of left them alone in EU4. But this was like the final battle, the final showdown between me and Germany, and it wasn't even for the sake of defeating Germany. It was just so I could get closer to naval invading Britain. They did pretty well at first, especially because I was at war with like a huge border all the way from Germany down to like where Serbia was, and then I had to take out the Turks. The Turks basically had no army, but they still managed to lose something like 1 million troops. Eventually with the Germans, I just kind of ran them down a bit, and I got some medium tanks supplied, I believe. Got some of those groovy T-34s in. My Air Force was still a little behind, but anyway, I did manage to push through Germany, as the French were helping me out, and specifically Lorraine. Lorraine was like a big player in this, a bigger player than I would have thought, because it seems like the borderland between France and Germany would have just kind of had that Confederation of the Rhine sort of syndrome, where they don't really do anything despite the fact they exist and take up a kind of big area. But actually no, and they ended up being, they puppeted like 15 countries during this, but that's later. Lorraine lost something like 500,000 men while only killing 10,000 Germans, or 50,000 Germans or something. I don't know, they weren't very good, but I guess the French helped push through, and while my allies took heinous casualties, if I'm being honest, I'm pretty sure about 4 million to 5 million French soldiers died during this whole campaign. I did manage to push through Berlin, and we conquered Germany. It was not that difficult after that to take out the Turks. And eventually, at a point, it was just the British, who, of course, I was at war with the British and the Turks, even though they weren't allied. It was just the British holding on to Turkish land. So then, of course, when the Ottomans surrendered and the Turkish soldiers were disbanded, all those British soldiers just got immediately slaughtered. And I had to march down to Egypt as well, but that wasn't too bad. The USA ended up also fighting Mexico, and it's because the USA joined the British, I believe, and the Mexicans just... they were going loco, is all I can tell you. You had Alaska fighting Colombia and Mexico against the USA, and at the beginning they were pretty balanced. The only real difference was that Mexico had half the population. And I assume that's probably what eventually killed Mexico, as their casualties were even up until the end. And aside from that, the British literally intervened in every single war that I was in here. There were British in Germany, there were British in Turkey. Even when I had to finish off Egypt towards the end, there were British there too. And while I was doing this, and I was securing my new puppets in the Middle East, I wasn't at war with Persia because I refused to join the war against Persia, and they never joined the war against me. Because we had that advantage of being historical friends, which allowed me to focus on killing Germany. Finishing off Germany, I should say, while only keeping a couple men killing Egypt. Which was nice, but of course I did eventually have to go to war with Persia, and in the meantime the US was starting to beat Mexico, but that war was pretty brutal. And I fought Persia. They weren't too difficult, but I was also double-teamed by Persia and Shun and a lot of China, which just meant that there were just hordes of soldiers just flooding at me. In the meantime, I had a nice peaceful stroll through Portuguese Australia. It was a nice travel, just kind of got to walk in there. They didn't even have any soldiers. And in the meantime, absolute carnage in Asia, as 2 million Persians are dead, 3 million Shun are dead, and like another 3 million of the another Chinese country were dead. One province Chinese country lost like 500,000 people and was on scraping the barrel like a year and a half into that war. My God, so many... I'm going to get to it at the end about specific statistics, but oh my God, it was brutal. Because I had to fight the Persians not only through Persia, meaning I actually killed most of their army because they didn't surrender until they were down to 5 divisions. Which is the thing, the Germans lost like 3 million to 4 million, but they didn't have all their divisions crushed around them, so they would have taken more, but The Persians had most of their armies encircled before they surrendered, so they lost like 90% of their army. Once again, the British were upholding them in India, while there were also more British, bet you'll never get it, in China as well. There were British everywhere. You name a continent and there were British soldiers on it, I swear. Literally everywhere except Australia, there were British soldiers at some point. Even in Africa. When I just managed to pick up some African allies and the French, I mean, basically everybody was fighting in Africa except me, because I realized that the supply thing was going to be a real issue, so I didn't bother. There were British there too. There were British freaking everywhere. It was ridiculous. So while that was going on, I was just destroying the shun, and I did tag over to some of these countries because I just like to see what they're doing, just to see what they're making. And I found out that the British were basically using the Chinese tactics that the Chinese were also actively using. And the one thing that united that great British alliance, aside from being democratic, their love of using great war tanks. All of them were using almost exclusively great war tanks for like 3/4 of the war. And like one, I don't remember which, but one of them had like a Great War Tank Mark 9. So it's not that they couldn't have made other tanks. It's not that they didn't have the experience to make good tanks. And some of them had better tanks researched. No, they were just producing souped up Great War tanks, which, if you look at the stats, the best Great War tank is still, like, way worse than a completely base level, like, light tank 1 or 2. So don't even get me started on the fact that I had T-34 shooting British Mark 5s in 1942. And these... What the hell? Britain? Jesus Christ. So I continued slapping the Chinese. The Persians were kind of done as I made my way into their Indian territories, and I've actually had to fight India proper. And India had died facing the Persians in their own war, like their own individual war, so this was the second incarnation of India, because they started off fascist. They lost like 1.4 million there, and then another 500,000 fighting me, so India didn't have a great game, especially if you consider the Persian-Indian casualties. So we took India as well, and got like 2 of the other countries there. I think it was Orissa and Vijayanagar to join us, which was cool. They were actually pretty helpful, though a lot of them died as well. That's the common theme, is more than any of the other 2 parts, just a fucking ton of people died in this game. Everywhere. Aside from that, I did manage to actually navally invade England, which was surprisingly easy. I mean, I'd been having my naval bombers and stuff just bombard the English Channel the whole time. And then I get to England, nobody there. It's like a Chick-fil-A on Sundays. It's totally empty. Only by the time I was like past London and almost making my way into Scotland did they start to get actual resistance. And by that time it was over. I had like 40 divisions up there. And of course, keep in mind, these are my 40 like elite divisions. These guys all of them had medium tanks in them. And we were just slaughtering them. We had everything. And we even ended up like just jumping across to Ireland as well, because why not? There were only like 2 divisions there anyway, and one of them was American. So that was just an absolute crapshoot. But the British didn't surrender. Keep in mind, at this point, the British had about 5 million casualties. Keep in mind, in real World War II, the British lost, and this number may be wrong, but I know I'm in the ballpark, around 400,000 to 500,000 soldiers, I think, maybe 300,000. And even just by now, this isn't the max, this is just in like 1943 or 42, they've lost 5 million soldiers. So don't even get me started on that. After that, we also went to war with Liège by the time that we were finished with the Chinese. And keep in mind, Liège was initially a European country. A European country that colonized Southeast Asia. And then its European holdings died. I think they got conquered by like Lorraine or Germany or something. And then Liège, by the time it was converted into this Hoi4 game, was an Asian country. It had the European name, but it was Asian country, like Asian culture, everything. So it was this European flag, European named Asian country that ended up, in the end, having about 15% of their population die, just military in the war. But we invaded them from the northeast once I kind of forced my way through a neutral Chinese country after we'd finished off Shun and the other one, I think it was Liang or something. And that place wasn't fun to fight, but we did eventually get through there. And aside from that, now it was time for North America, and I should have learned my lesson from the like 50 other times I've done it, that fighting in Quebec is not a fun experience. If you ever invade America, folks, stay out of Canada, okay? It was a bad time. I spent like probably 2/3 of the invasion of America was just me trying to get a foothold through Quebec. And if it was just me with no allies there, it probably wouldn't have been so bad. But the supply was so terrible with everybody there that there's just no way. But eventually we did break through, and by the time we got to about New York in America, it was over. They'd already lost like 6 million people. It was a crapshoot at that point. We were just blowing them apart. At that point I was starting to get like super high level medium tanks with like a +3 to every stat. Just prototyped some jets as well at that point in time and all that stuff. And finally we beat America, and the casualties were astounding. Liège, they had a population of 8 million, lost 1.5 million people. England lost 8 million people, and they had a population of like 80 at the beginning, I believe, 80 million, so they lost 10%. America lost like 7 million. If we're going back to like Persia, basically Persia and both China's lost 3 million. I lost like 2 million. The French lost 2 million on our side, and then there's just the whole spread of other massive countries that just... Lots of people died, but that war was finally over, and I was satisfied, except not. I actually went to war with dictatorial Xinjiang because I wanted to wipe out every ideology that wasn't mine, because that always goes well. So I wiped out fascism in Xinjiang. That was really easy. And then one was left, Italy. Well, I took out Spain after that, but that one wasn't even eventful. They hardly put up a fight except for losing like 2 million, but that's okay. Italy. So Italy had taken Serbia away when they invaded Croatia after Serbia basically got gangbanged early on by Croatia, basically the whole German alliance, before I went to war with the Germans. So Serbia had been a one-province country for most of this war, and they'd still thrown in like 15 divisions or something. I don't know how, but I decided it was my duty to, as I had once done before, liberate Serbia, to liberate Serbia again. Except this time from the Italians and not the Turks or the Croatians. Serbia's had a rough time. So we invaded Italy, and that was interesting, because it was, I believe the numbers were 31 million active duty soldiers on my side to their 2.5 million. Which is a lot for Italy, don't get me wrong, but 2.3 of that 2.5 million died since they didn't surrender until we took Sicily. So then, after that, and then slapping Spain, but they were on siesta or something, so that didn't take very long. We finally won. And the amount of casualties in this campaign was astounding, and I enjoyed this mega campaign a whole lot. This was amazing. I know how to do it now, so I could do more mega campaigns, so if you have a suggestion for another country I should play, or what I should do, maybe a challenge for it, I'll do it. But as it goes for this campaign, Russia dominated the world under our leader, who I didn't even mention, Pyotr Konstantinov, who was cool, I guess. Took over the world and stuff. And, God, this, more than any of the other ones, this mega campaign was just brutal. Brutal for me because I had to record it all in 2 days, which was like, it was a lot of hours, many hours to record it all an entire game when it was lagging a lot by 1943 in 2 days. And it was just brutal for everybody involved. I'm pretty sure every major country that got into a war lost at least 10% of its population. Except for me, because I'm amazing and a human and not an AI. But God, that was devastating. But it was great, and I hope that you've enjoyed this experience throughout my mega campaign. Sorry if I rambled a little bit, and sorry that this is late, but as I said, more suggestions, I'm here to hear them. And I'll see you in the next video. До свидания.